From 129 to 131 AC, a succession struggle between Queen Rhaenyra and her half-brother Aegon II set the Seven Kingdoms ablaze. 20 dragons were alive at the start of the dance, and by the end, 17 of them were dead. The Targaryens did not lose them to a superior enemy, they lost them to each other, and when it was over, the dynasty that had ruled through Dragonfire had almost nothing left. This is the full story of how every dragon died in the Dance of the Dragons, in order and in detail. The dance begins with the death of Arrax. To understand why he died, you have to go back to a fight in a courtyard at Driftmark, years before the war began. When Aemond Targaryen claimed Vhagar on the night of Laena Valerian's funeral, he was confronted by Baela and Rhaena, Laena's daughters, along with Rhaenyra's sons Jacaerys and Lucerys. The argument turned into a brawl. Aemond called them bastards. Lucerys picked up a knife and slashed Aemond across the face, taking his left eye. Aemond replaced it with a sapphire and carried the grudge quietly for years. When the dance began, Lucerys Valerian was sent south to Storm's End as a messenger, flying his young dragon Arrax to secure Lord Boros Baratheon's support for the Black faction. He arrived to find Aemond already there, having offered a marriage alliance the Blacks could not match. Boros turned Lucerys away. Then, as Lucerys turned to leave, Aemond demanded that Lucerys pay the debt from Driftmark, put out his own eye right there. Lucerys refused. He was an envoy, unarmed for negotiation. Boros himself intervened, ordering his guards to escort Lucerys out, rather than allow someone to be maimed under his roof. Lucerys mounted Arrax and flew into a storm above Shipbreaker Bay. Aemond followed on Vhagar the moment he was released. In the show, Aemond claims he only meant to chase Lucerys, frighten him, humiliate him, send him home terrified. Arrax panics, disobeys Lucerys, and spits fire directly into Vhagar's face. That is what ends it. Vhagar ignores Aemond's commands, closes on Arrax, and devours them both. The look on Aemond's face is not satisfaction, it is panic. He knows immediately what he has done. The book tells it differently. Fire and Blood treats Lucerys' death as deliberate. Aemond pursued him to kill him, not to frighten him. The show's idea that Vhagar acted on her own is its own framing. The book places the responsibility on Aemond. Either way, the result is the same. Arrax dies, and with him dies the last illusion that this war still had limits. Lucerys had flown under a messenger's protection, a boundary both sides had still respected. His death erased it. Rhaenyra demanded Aemond's head, and Daemon answered in his own way. He sent Blood and Cheese into the Red Keep to kill Aemond. They could not find him. Instead, they found Queen Helaena, forced her to identify which child was the boy, and killed Jacaerys in his bed. In the book, the scene is even crueler. Helaena has 3 children, including a younger son, Maelor, and is forced to choose which son dies. She names Maelor, hoping to spare her heir. Blood and Cheese kill Jacaerys anyway, leaving Maelor to live with the knowledge that his mother chose him. A son for a son. A child for a child. Before this, the war still had limits. After Lucerys and Jacaerys, it had none. The dance had truly begun. After Arrax, the war moved out of storms and corridors and into the sky. The next dragon to fall was Meleys, the Red Queen, ridden by Princess Rhaenys, who had once been passed over at the Great Council of 101 AC. Rhaenys had joined Rhaenyra's cause with more than political loyalty. She had a score to settle. Meleys was the strongest dragon the Blacks could send into battle, and Rhaenys was the one rider on either side who combined judgment with real experience. She flew to Rook's Rest to break a green siege, a measured response to what looked like a limited military move. What she did not know was that Criston Cole had built the whole battle as a trap. In the show, though, the trap does not unfold cleanly. Aegon II, drunk, impulsive, and desperate to prove himself, arrives first on Sunfyre and throws himself into the fight, before Aemond enters it. Meleys tears into Sunfyre, ripping through the younger dragon and nearly killing him. Then Aemond arrives on Vhagar, and instead of waiting for a clear shot, he gives the order, Dracarys, with his own brother still in the line of fire. Vhagar unleashes Dragonfire, and the flames engulf Sunfyre and Aegon II, who fall from the sky, broken and burned. The battle then narrows to what it was always going to become, Meleys against Vhagar. Even then, Meleys does not go down easily. She fights Vhagar hard, slashes open her underbelly, and breaks free after the first clash. Rhaenys still has a chance to withdraw. Instead, she turns back. Vhagar wins only when she ambushes Meleys from below, clamps her jaws around her neck, and crushes it. Meleys falls, and Rhaenys dies with her. The book version is different. There, the trap works more cleanly. Aegon II on Sunfyre and Aemond on Vhagar attack Meleys together. Meleys badly injures Sunfyre, but when she closes on him, Vhagar falls on them from above, and all 3 dragons crash to the ground. Vhagar rises unharmed. Meleys and Rhaenys die, while Sunfyre and Aegon II survive terribly wounded. That is what Rook's Rest costs the Blacks. Not just a dragon, but their best dragon rider. It also reveals something ugly about the Greens. In the show, Aemond does not merely risk his brother, he appears willing to burn him. The Greens win the battle, but only by burning their own king. The next losses were younger and, in some ways, worse, but the show has not reached this point yet, so from here on, we will follow the version told in the book, Fire and Blood. Vermax was Jacaerys Valerian's dragon, and Stormcloud belonged to his little brother, Aegon the Younger. One death cost the Blacks their heir and one of their most capable princes. The other saved a child just long enough to die doing it. Jacaerys Valerian had spent the opening phase of the war helping hold the Black Coalition together, flying to the Eyrie and Winterfell, securing the Vale and the North through the kind of patient diplomatic work nobody else in the faction could do. He was 15 years old and already central to his mother's cause. At the Battle of the Gullet, he led the Black naval defense against the Triarchy fleet the Greens had hired from Essos. Vermax was brought down during a low pass over the ships. Some accounts blame crossbow fire, others say a grapnel tore open the dragon's belly and dragged him into a burning galley. Jacaerys leapt free and clung to smoking wreckage in the water, only to be struck by Myrish crossbow quarrels before one finally took him through the neck and he sank beneath the sea. On the same day, his young brother Aegon escaped on Stormcloud, who carried him to safety despite terrible wounds and died soon after landing on Dragonstone. 2 dragons were gone, but Jacaerys was the heavier loss. After the Gullet, the Blacks had lost not only Rhaenyra's heir, but also one of the few figures in the war who had already shown he could win allies and keep them. Not every dragon death came with a speech, a grudge, or a battlefield. The next one belongs to a dragon almost nobody knew. Grey Ghost. He was a wild dragon, unclaimed, unridden, living on the outer reaches of Dragonstone and answering to no one. In 130 AC, fisherfolk found him dead at the base of the Dragonmont, torn apart and partially devoured. The Castellan, Sir Robert Quince, blames the cannibal, another wild dragon known to feed on dead dragons and hatchlings, but he was wrong. Sailors from a merchant ship called the Nessaria, blown off course near Dragonstone, had seen 2 dragons fighting above the mountain, and one of them had been golden. That pointed not to the cannibal, but to Sunfyre, still grievously wounded from Rook's Rest and hunting on Dragonstone without a rider. Then came the clash everyone had been waiting for. Vhagar, the oldest and deadliest dragon alive, and Caraxes, the bloodworm, scarred, savage, and bound to Daemon across decades. This was the war turning into a vendetta in the open sky. Daemon Targaryen had been hunting Aemond for months, driven by both strategy and revenge. Aemond had killed Lucerys, helped bring down Rhaenys and Meleys at Rook's Rest, and become the Greens' most destructive force in the field, burning his way across the Riverlands on Vhagar. As long as Aemond lived, so did the terror he carried through the sky. He found him at last above the God's Eye, with Harrenhal looming over the lakeshore below. Caraxes could not match Vhagar in size. No living dragon could. So Daemon did not fight a contest of size. He turned it into a close, catastrophic grapple. Rising high above the lake, Caraxes dove out of the setting sun on Aemond's blind side and slammed into Vhagar with terrible force. The 2 dragons locked together in midair, screaming and tearing at one another as they fell. Caraxes closed his jaws around Vhagar's neck and kept biting deeper even as Vhagar's claws raked his belly open and her teeth ripped away one of his wings. Then Daemon made the move that ended the duel. As the dragons tumbled toward the lake, he swung a leg over his saddle, jumped from Caraxes onto Vhagar, tore the helm from Aemon's head, and drove Dark Sister down through his blind eye so hard the blade came out the back of his throat. Aemond died before he reached the water. A half-heartbeat later, the dragon struck the god's eye with such force that the impact threw up a gout of water said to be as tall as Kingspire Tower at Harrenhal. Vhagar sank to the bottom of the lake, her throat ripped open. Caraxes lived only long enough to drag his ruined body from the water onto the shore beneath Harrenhal, where he died. Much later, when Vhagar's remains were found, Aemond's bones were still chained to the saddle, with Dark Sister thrust hilt deep through his eye socket. Vhagar's death was a military disaster for the Greens. She had killed Arax and Melees, and she was the only dragon they had who could dominate the sky by sheer size and terror. Without her, the balance of dragon power shifted hard against them. Daemon's death is harder to measure. He removed the Greens' greatest weapon and got the revenge he wanted, but he also took one of the Blacks' most formidable and dangerous figures out of the war. The fight above the God's Eye was not just a duel, it was mutual annihilation. Personal, strategic, and apocalyptic, all at once. Until this point, most dragons had died because riders took them into war. The next 5 died because the people of King's Landing turned on them. Shrykos and Morgul were hatchlings, Tyraxes was young, Dreamfire was ancient, and Syrax was the queen's own dragon. One night took them all. These were not battlefield deaths, but something the war had not yet produced. A starving, frightened city rising against dragons themselves. Rhaenyra held King's Landing, but she had not won its people. The city was exhausted, hungry, and bled by war. With the treasury empty, her rule brought back old taxes and added harsh new ones. Then came Helena's death. She had been loved by the people in a way Rhaenyra no longer was, and when she died after months of captivity, the city quickly filled with rumors that Rhaenyra had murdered her. Whether true or not, that was what the streets believed, and belief mattered more than truth. Then came the Shepherd, gathering the city's fear and rage and turning both against Rhaenyra and her dragons. He called dragons demons, Targaryens abominations, and Rhaenyra a cursed queen, and thousands answered him. The mob was driven now not only by hunger, but by taxes, grief, fear, and religious fury. The mob went inside Dragon Pit with axes, torches, spears, clubs, bows, and whatever else they had. Trapped beneath the dome and bound by chains, the dragons could not fight as dragons were meant to fight. Shrykos was brought down by Hob the Hewer. Morgul was slain by a rioter remembered as the Burning Knight, who kept coming even as dragonfire consumed him. Tyraxes became entangled when his chains fouled and was finished by the attackers. Dreamfire broke free, tore through her enemies, and in trying to escape, smashed into the dome, bringing half of it down on herself and the crowd below. In dying, she killed more of them than the others managed. Outside the pit, Prince Joffrey tried to do what courage could not make possible. After Rhaenyra forbade him to go, he slipped away and mounted Syrax without saddle or whip, likely hoping to reach the dragon pit and Tyraxes. But Syrax was not his dragon. Once airborne, she twisted beneath him and threw him down into Flea Bottom. The fall killed him, and the mob mutilated his body before the queen's men recovered what remained. Syrax died soon after. Unchained and riderless, she could have flown back to the Red Keep or left the city entirely, but instead she descended on the mobs around the dragon pit, killing many with tooth and claw. The chroniclers disagree on who struck the final blows, but they agree on the essential fact: the crowd brought her down. That night broke Rhaenyra. She lost her son, her dragon, and the last illusion that King's Landing was hers. By the time the war reached Tumbleton, even the dragons felt detached from any human plan. Seasmoke belonged to Adam of Hull, the one dragon seed who stayed loyal. Vermithor had belonged to Hugh Hammer, and now belonged to no one. Tessarion was the dragon of Daeron the Daring. The Second Battle of Tumbleton is the clearest picture the dance gives us of what happens when chaos exceeds anyone's ability to manage it. Hugh Hammer, the dragon seed who had betrayed the Blacks at the First Battle of Tumbleton, was already dead before the second battle began. Sir John Roxton found him in camp and said, "Lord Hammer, my condolences." When Hugh asked what for, Roxton answered, "You died in the battle." Then he drove Orphanmaker, his Valyrian steel blade, through him. Hugh's men killed Roxton immediately after. But Hugh was dead, and Vermithor, the Bronze Fury, one of the largest dragons alive, was now riderless on the battlefield. A riderless dragon does not hold a line or follow orders. He attacks everything. Adam of Hull had been falsely accused of conspiracy by Rhaenyra's own council, nearly arrested, and had kept fighting anyway. He was the last dragon rider still in the field for her cause. He flew Seasmoke south to Tumbleton, into a battle where Vermithor was riderless, Silverwing was present, and Tessarion was in the air. What followed was not a battle, it was a collision. Tessarion and Seasmoke found each other first, both young, both fast, circling and stooping without either landing a killing blow. Then Vermithor rose, blood smoking from wounds dealt by the men who had tried to kill him on the ground. Riderless, the Bronze Fury did not distinguish friend from foe. He simply attacked everything in reach. When Adam saw Vermithor turning on the men who had ridden out beside him, he drove Seasmoke down from above and slammed into the older dragon. He knew Seasmoke could not win. He flew in anyway. The two dragons locked together and rolled across the ground, too tangled to break free. Vermithor's size won in the end. He bit through Seasmoke's neck. Then he collapsed from the wounds Seasmoke had already dealt him and died. Adam was found dead beside his dragon. Tessarion survived the fighting, but was so badly damaged she lingered in agony until a longbowman named Billy Burley ended it with a mercy arrow from 100 yards. Adam of Hull was the one dragon seed who proved his loyalty when it cost him something. He was not killed by an enemy decision. He was killed by chaos, a riderless dragon with no side and no objective, in a battle no one was directing. By the end, almost nothing remained. Moondancer was a young dragon ridden by Baela Targaryen, Daemon's daughter. Sunfyre was a wreck of a dragon by then, his wing mangled at Rook's Rest, his body scarred by later fights, one eye gone, and yet still alive through sheer ferocity. Their fight feels less like a battle than the last convulsion of a war that should already have ended. By the time the war reached Dragonstone for its final act, almost everyone who had mattered at the beginning was gone. Rhaenyra had been captured and executed by Aegon II, fed to Sunfyre while her son Aegon the Younger was forced to watch. It was deliberate cruelty, not military necessity, vengeance made public. Baela met Sunfyre as Aegon II descended over Dragonstone before dawn, expecting the castle to be his. Moondancer was much smaller, but she was quick enough to evade Sunfyre's jaws and flame at first, darting beneath him and then raking his back and neck from above. Sunfyre answered with a blast of golden fire that likely blinded her, but she still slammed into him in midair, and the two dragons locked together and fell. On the ground, the fight turned. Moondancer tore chunks from Sunfyre's neck as they came down, but once they crashed into the yard, her speed no longer mattered against his size and weight. Sunfyre crushed her there, screamed his victory, tried to rise again, then collapsed back to the ground, too badly wounded ever to fly again. Baela survived the fall, burned and battered, while Sunfyre never flew again and died not long after from the total weight of his wounds. Aegon II outlasted his dragon by very little. His own council poisoned him when it became clear the realm could not endure a mutilated, vindictive king still bent on war while Cregan Stark's army was marching south. The throne passed to Aegon III, Rhaenyra's son, the very outcome the Greens had spent the war trying to prevent. When Aegon III married Jaehaera Targaryen, the only surviving child of Aegon II, the two shattered branches of the house were joined again, and the dance was politically brought to an end. But the dragons were gone in every way that mattered. Silverwing still lived, but no one ever claimed her again. Sheepstealer had vanished with Nettles, and the cannibal remained a wild terror on Dragonstone. Only Mourning was left within the Targaryen courtly world, and she was just a hatchling. The war was over, and with it, the Age of Dragons had effectively come to an end. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which dragon death hit you the hardest? And a very special thank you to the artists whose incredible work brought this video to life.